show where we explore consciousness, spirituality, and technology and how they interrelate to each other. My name is Maja D'Aoust, and I'm going to be going solo today. Our regular host, Erik Davis, is on hiatus for the day. We'll miss him so much. I'll try and stick my teeny tiny feet into his great big shoes today. Thanks for listening to the Progressive Radio Network. We have a pretty exciting show today. I'm excited about it. We're going to be talking to guest Timothy Wyllie, and he's just put out a new book on Feral House Publishing. It's called Love, Sex, Fear, and Death, all things that I think we all need to know more about. And it's about his experience in the Process Church of the Final Judgement. It's a pretty controversial little group that started in the mid-'60s and extended on over into the 70s and late 70s. And there's still some people, I think, that are very interested in the ideas today. And Timothy, in his book, describes his experience in this group, and I just really loved the book, and it brings me to something that I think about a lot, which is that idea of belonging to a spiritual community and that kind of real problem of trying to explore consciousness with other people. Because a lot of the kind of things we've talked about on the show so far have dealt with exploring your consciousness kind of, relatively by yourself, where you go on, different altered states or altered states of consciousness, and then you kind of like deal with that and present it to a community, which is a little bit different than dealing with those experiences in a community and then trying to deal with each other. And I think that forever we as people have had these experiences of trying to get together in these little spiritual communities where we can share those states of expanded consciousness and kind of altered states. And then we form these little groups, and sometimes they turn into cults, and sometimes they turn into religious sects, or they just turn into little communes. But the stories that unfold in these little cults are so fascinating to me because I really think that they represent a microcosm of what happens in humanity as a whole with dealing with different states of consciousness. And we can really look to these groups to see how we interact with each other as human beings and look at the mistakes and what they do right and things like that. And that's something that I thought Timothy did very good in the book. He looked at it very honestly and was very candid with his experiences inside the church and with the people in these communities. And he talks about the very valid and extremely, intense spiritual experiences that he had within the group, regardless of any of the shortcomings that the group might have had as a whole. So anyway, I'd like to bring him on without too much more ado. Timothy, are you there?
Yes, I am, Maja. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, thanks for coming. I'm so delighted to talk to you today, just because I've really enjoyed reading your book, and I just thought you did a terrific job of presenting your experience, like I said, in just a very honest and candid way. And I was wondering, one of the first things I kind of wanted to talk about, of course, which I'm sure everyone is asking all kinds of questions about, when dealing with the Process Church, it had such a stigma about being, this kind of evil thing, and there was all these, ideas that there was an evil entity to it. And I was just wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about some of the misconceptions that people had in regards to you guys being satanic.
Well, yes, let me start by saying that, in a sense, we were hoisted on our own petard on that one, because we, in a sense, intended to be mysterious and secretive. And there was the centerpiece of the group, Marianne de Grimston, was a very secretive woman. And in fact, I think through the entire time of the process, the 20 years or so, nobody knew that she was actually the person in charge of the whole place. So I think that it kind of rebounded on us in an unfortunate way, because when you create a mystery, of course, anybody else can fill in the gaps. And it started with a book by Ed Sanders called The Family. and he associated us with Manson quite erroneously. But of course, the press picked it up, and he wrote a book, and one thing sort of followed onto another, and I think that probably started it off. And then later on, when the Son of Sam murder started happening, that also was, again, completely erroneously pointed at us. And I think, it was a great shame in many ways that it went down like that. But on the other hand, I can completely understand why it did, and I think we were very foolish to take that mysterious, rather secretive approach.
And I think, like you guys mentioned, your kind of godheads that you presented early on were Jehovah, Satan, and Lucifer. And I think, obviously, whenever you even include the name Satan and Lucifer, you're going to catch a lot of flack. But I
yes,
think it was
very,
like, the Theosophical Society, when they first started, the name of their magazine was Lucifer.
Yes.
And so then they, caught huge flack for that forever on afterwards. Yeah. But for you guys, in your book, you kind of viewed those entities more as archetypes relating to psychology. I thought that was very interesting. Can you describe kind of what your role was within those archetypes?
Yes, yes. I mean, in a sense, they became gods, I think, more when we became a church in 1971, I think it was, when we kind of had to, create this thing, to satisfy the IRS. But they had originally started as you say, as archetypes of particular kinds of human behavior, and I think we can all identify that. I mean, the Jehovian type is rather authoritarian on the, strong leadership, perhaps conservative, if you want to sort of put a right-wing thing on it. The Lucifer type is softer, more imaginative, probably from a Jehovian viewpoint, a little slipshod. And then the satanic personality is more fiery, more passionate. And each of these personality types have an upside and a downside. And that's what we were really looking at. So, for instance, in my case, I was tabbed as a Lucifer Satan type, which meant that I have a lot of passion, but I'm also somewhat whimsical by nature. So,
well, that's not so bad.
Yeah, it doesn't mean I worship Satan or Lucifer, for heaven's sake, or ever did.
So, just to make that clear, did anyone in the church actually worship Satan or Lucifer?
No, it didn't happen like that. It wasn't like that.
Yeah, that's what I gathered. And you guys just kind of picked up that stigma, I think, just from having those names, really.
Yes, and also, you see, don't forget, this was in the middle 60s. Things were, it was in London. Everything was kind of up in the air. The social changes were very profound. They were happening all around us. Perhaps in our innocence, in a sense, we used those names. We didn't think for one moment they would create quite such a kerfuffle. And then on the other hand, because of course we were a paradoxical organization, we did deliberately set out to shock people. And of course we're shocked by that in our turn.
Came right back at you, huh? Yeah, I really liked the whole psychological, the whole Process Church was very psychological in its beginnings, and you mentioned how Marianne and Robert were into Scientology before they got started, and they kind of based some of their system for the church on some of the psychological workings that are in the Scientology church about, kind of going through things on an e-meter, which I believe you guys had kind of developed your own e-meter. Is that correct?
Well, we went through a series of changes. Yes, I mean, Robert and Marianne basically left Scientology believing that they could actually use the e-meter more correctly than Hubbard was using it. And so we started by using the e-meter. Then we basically redesigned it. It's exactly the same system inside and called it a P-scope and used that for about a year. But we got so good at the... and so empathic that we were almost telepathic, certainly with each other. So we would be able to run sessions on each other and also on the public without using these meters and just being able to read the other person.
That's amazing that you guys would do it so intensely. People forget, they think if it's a cult, you just kind of hang around. But you guys were intensely involved in practices to develop, like you said, these kind of telepathic things?
Yeah, I think actually it's odd, but if one looks into any cult, what one finds is that people work incredibly hard in them. And this is deliberate, I think, because it keeps one's attention off thinking, what am I doing? Yeah. So I think
I start thinking about
cults do have a reputation
else.
of very hard work, and yes, we worked. I mean, if you can imagine it, this is 24 hours a day. We never give ourselves a holiday. We took maybe half a day off a week. And I think we stopped even doing that towards the end. And being with the same group of people, for 15 years, and really getting to know people on such a very deep level. It was an extraordinary experience, an extraordinarily uplifting experience, as well as being a very puzzling one as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think when you're in a group like that and you're just concentrated to that kind of crystal clarity with each other, just from even being with each other, but then involving these kind of techniques to really get into the nitty-gritty of each other. People, I don't think they understand the different intense experiences you can have. Can you describe maybe like one of your really intense telepathic experiences you had during that time?
One of the things that we developed was a system of meditation where we would all meditate together. And we would ask a particular question of these things that we felt in touch with. And then we would come out of the meditation and we would go around and each person would add what they had, quote-unquote, got in the meditation. And, we use this technique to actually sort of get us around the world. And our final destination was a place called Stuhl, which was in the Yucatan Peninsula. Mm-hmm. And we felt that the beings had guided us down there. But the final meditation that we had, the description of the place that we were to find, which was ultimately about 17 kilometers up the beach, which we had to walk up to, in the meditation, there were about 8 or 10 individual items which exactly represented what we found when we actually got to Stuhl.
Wow.
It was quite an extraordinary affirmation. And of course, with that behind us, how could one deny that one wasn't being guided or one wasn't being led for some important purpose?
Absolutely. It's just too synchronistic. And I love your description of your experience in Stuhl, and just one of my favorites was you were so honest about, every embarrassing thing that happened to you. Not even just embarrassing, but, maybe humiliating is more like the right word that Marianne would do to you. And one of my favorites was when you describe how she, kind of banished you from the group, and you're in the middle of nowhere in Mexico, like in the wilderness, and you have nowhere to go, and you went outside the group and you just sat for several days by yourself in the wilderness, and you described how the bugs crawled all over you and you just didn't even pay it any mind, and then they kind of left you alone. But I thought that kind of intensity of, those like willpower and concentration building experiences were just amazingly described by you. Would you say like that was kind of a culmination of one of the processes you went through in Stuhl, like just having that experience?
Well, it certainly was one of them. I as you said in the introduction, there was a great number of very intense experiences, but that one has paid me good heed in the ensuing years, in that insects don't bother me anymore. For some reason, mosquitoes avoid me. So I don't know. Maybe that was the payoff to that. But I want to go back to something you said in your introduction, because I think it's relevant to this, which was the idea that when you're in a group, that it's a different kind of work that when you're doing it spiritual work individually. Mm-hmm. And I would, yes, agree with that, because firstly, it amps up the intensity, because as we all sort of become aware as we work with our spiritual selves, that we project a lot onto other people, and we think that other people are doing this and that when it's actually basically our projection. Now, when you're in a group and these projections are happening all the time, you actually start to trust other people and to bring back those projections and realize, yes, that's me. That's a bit of me that I haven't accepted yet, reflected back at me. So, in fact, it's an incredibly accelerated way of evolving a higher consciousness. Sooner or later, we have.
I absolutely agree. And so many people think to be spiritual, you have to be like a monk and kind of, separate yourself and go off into seclusion. But we live in a world with other people. And, our consciousness is connected to each other. And I think when you can do that in a group, it's really kind of that way of going back to be connected to the whole, working with people and not just in isolation.
Exactly. And you see, what you often find in these little spiritual groups that start off, like the harmonic convergence and things like that, is that everybody comes, with their own garbage, if you like, and it becomes actually a spiritual group, whether they like it or not, because people have to deal with each other. We have to deal with each other, and when we deal with each other, our stuff comes up.
Yeah, and you had mentioned in the book how much you kind of had an extreme dislike towards Marianne, the leader, from the very beginning when you first met her, and I just thought that was so interesting because it's like you get involved in these groups, and whether you like the people or not, and sometimes you can positively hate a person, but that's really where the hardest spiritual work comes in, is having to be with these people and do the work with someone you don't like. I mean, that's where you make the most growth rather than doing it with people you really like. Did you find that to be true?
Yes, I think that's entirely true. I mean, we had, of course, a very wide field to draw from. People we absolutely loved and people we couldn't abide. But the basic tenet of the process was to do with personal responsibility. Critics have said we took it too far, but actually it's a very, very useful way of living one's life, even to the point of, if an airplane wheel falls off a plane and drops on you, is it your responsibility? Well, yes, it is. As a matter of fact, it's your responsibility to be under that plane when it drops its wheel. And what that does is it allows, by withdrawing the kind of making oneself a victim and empowering oneself again, it gives one back the ability to be able to change. Because if we blame everything on something happening outside, we can't change, because that means the other person has to change. But if we withdraw that and take it back and say, okay, this is me, I can change it, I have the power to change it. So that was the basic tenet of the process, and it really ran all the way through.
I thought I was really inspired by what you said in the epilogue and just how, those kind of themes, they apply so much right now. I mean, just even working in groups and processing for responsibility and working with people you don't like, I mean, that translates to the macrocosm of how we deal with other countries, how we get along with our enemies, how we deal with people. And I just really thought you were really right in saying that, the things that the process was based on in terms of personal responsibility, I mean, they're just so needed right now. And I felt like you really got a lot from being able to develop that while you were in the process.
I think it's been certainly I can only speak for myself here, I think it's been very helpful as I've sort of, but it's 30 years since I left, so a lot more has happened in my life.
I really like that, too, how it's been so long since you were in that you get this tremendous hindsight from your experience, and you really kind of put that in the book. Do you think that writing the book helped you to deal and kind of get more out of your process experience? Did that help you integrate a lot of it?
I felt it was pretty integrated before I started, actually, because I had, in a sense, made my peace with Mary Ann before she died, albeit not quite a satisfactory peace, but at least I wasn't sort of chuntering on about it. And I think I needed to do that before I wrote the book. But what was fascinating about writing the book, if you're trying to remember events 30 years, 35, 40 years ago, you kind of grasp onto, the most profound thing that happened. And then it's like sort of working one's way up the tail of a dragon, was it raining? Oh, yes, of course it was raining, as I remember, my trousers were wet. And you can go, and you can build up a whole picture like that. I've never done that before. It was really a wonderful experience. I loved it.
Yeah, there's some points in your book where you mention how you can actually see, in your mind's eye, the exact layout of some of the rooms of these places, and I just thought that was pretty amazing that you were able to have that level of recall so many years later.
Well, I've done a lot of, most of my other books, I've written 4 other books, are all basically autobiographical in the sense of examining situations that I've been through with dolphins, with angels, with extraterrestrials.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost always in retrospect. But I keep a very detailed journal, and I think that writing about those experiences helped me in being able to write about experiences that happened, 3 times further away.
Right. Well, that's so. You did a tremendous job. I wanted to maybe, if for a moment, you could talk about some of the more negative aspects of being in the group, just because when dealing with these kind of communities and cults and things, there's amazing experiences that people have, but then there's always these total stinker things that seem to happen over and over with these little communities, and you guys certainly suffered some of those. I know probably you mentioned in your book a lot of those were attributed to Marianne, but some of the things about how the children were treated were such a big bummer, and you had mentioned that too. It's explained in the book, just kind of what happened. Do you feel like that happened exclusively because of Marianne trying to exert control, or what do you think was at the base of some of those?
It was a very, very autocratic structure. Nothing much happened that Marianne didn't either know about or didn't, give permission for, or didn't encourage. So I can't say for sure that she was behind that. She was herself a childless woman, and also a woman who I don't think particularly liked children. That might have kind of rippled down through the women in the group because there was a sort of almost always an emulatory aspect to it all, to be more like Marianne or to be more like Robert, in the way that human beings are. So I can't say that she's directly responsible, but I can certainly hold her in overall responsibility, and Robert as well.
Right.
I think I wrote a little bit about a confrontation I had with him, whereby we had a dreadful incident where a young boy who had left the group some years earlier had got himself shot by his best friend, and I confronted Robert. This was some years after we left. On how could we have brought up children with so low self-esteem that he could have encouraged his friend to shoot him?
Right.
What's that all about? And Robert, of course, completely lost it.
Well, it was so ironic because you mentioned the main tenet of process was to take responsibility, and it seemed like in your description of that Robert was not taking responsibility for that.
One of the interesting paradoxes is that it appeared, certainly in respect, and probably I should have spotted it earlier when I was in the group, that both Marianne and Robert were chronically incapable of taking responsibility. I think we teach what we need to know, and that was probably the bottom line of it.
Right. Maybe they made that the focus because they knew that's what they couldn't do.
I guess subconsciously that would certainly make sense. Yeah.
And it extended, into your guys' personal lives of all the people. Of course, another big thing that everyone, talks about when they talk about the Process Church is, there was all these orgies and crazy stuff. But I just loved how you described it in your book and how you're like, well, it wasn't fantastic at all. It was pretty terrible. And you guys started out celibate in the inception of the group, which I thought was very interesting. And then it kind of developed, and to have a celibate commune of, these kind of religious ideas in the 60s is pretty amazing anyway. But then it kind of turned into this thing. Maybe you can describe a little bit about how that dynamic shifted.
Yes, I don't think it's fair to say it turned into. We actually remained celibate, at least in name, for certainly the period I was there. Mm-hmm. But I think what happened was that after about 3 years or so, there was so much sexual energy running around, and I think Marianne and Robert said to themselves, well, we're going to have to find some way of dealing with this. So they kind of organized sort of pairings off, and it was very much a sort of we had kind of like week periods where we would just spend, with one person, and we would be, we wouldn't have to do work around the house or go out selling magazines or things like that.
Right.
And then subsequent to that, there were a series of, and I would hesitate to call them orgies because, there is a fun aspect that people perhaps associate with orgies. These really weren't fun. They were more, I think, Marianne's, at least the early ones, her attempt to help us release our English sexual repression, which is pretty profound. And she had a background as a call girl, so she was pretty unrepressed in that area. Although, of course, she didn't join in the things at all. She
it seemed like she just kind of oversaw them.
Yeah, she and Robert oversaw them and directed them, yes.
Kind of
so curious.
Did you ever feel like that? Did it work? Did it help you guys work through that repression, or did it just end up being awkward?
I know. I think it helped. I can only speak personally. No, I think it helped. I mean, you commented on the level of intimacy and honesty that I was able to write my book, and I think that helped. I don't have any basic inhibitions about talking about fairly delicate things openly. So perhaps that helped, and I can't speak for the others. Later on, there were only, I think, 2 or 3 or 4 towards the beginning, and then somewhere in the 70s, I think there were a few more of those. And at that point, I think I write it in the book, I suspect that Marianne was more involved in establishing sexual guilt and manipulating through sexual guilt than she was actually helping us release our repression.
Right. And it happens, I mean, in every community, large church organizations included, sexuality has to be dealt with sooner or later. And even some of the most tremendous celibates in the history of religion have ongoing battles with it. Gandhi was very forthcoming with all of his battles with it. And I just think that it was interesting to see how that played out in your all's group and how Marianne kind of foresaw that and wanted to control it in some strange kind of way.
Yes.
And I think another big philosophy that was kind of behind the Process Church was the joining of the opposites. And I was wondering if maybe you could explain a little bit about that alchemical tenet and how you guys had the concept of unifying the opposites with, like, Christ and Satan, and if you could speak a little bit about that.
Yes, sure. I'm glad you used the word alchemical because, of course, there is a very, very profound, certainly European tradition, and I think you find it in a lot of spiritual traditions, which is that the concept of uniting or unifying opposites, so you produce a third energy, which is a reconciliation of the two polarity, the two fighting energies, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
When we moved towards becoming more religious as opposed to spiritual, I think it was Robert who started pointing out that one of Christ's basic dictums is love your enemy. And Robert, then made the jump of saying, well, who is the enemy? Well, Satan is the enemy in that particular cosmology. Therefore, Christ and Satan need to reconcile their differences. And very much part of the paradoxical nature of the whole process was the fact that we had very good aspects and we had very poor aspects. And these things had to somehow resolve themselves into one coherent unit. And I think they probably did mostly in the magazines that we produced, which were really quite extraordinary for that time and have recently, I'm told, been hailed as one of the progenitors of modern magazine design.
The designs are incredible, and I understand you were kind of the brainchild behind the magazines. Is that right? You pretty much did all that work.
Well, yeah, I did the design work along with a couple of other people who were very, very helpful. But yes, no, I was the art director of them.
They're beautiful magazines, and the articles in them I thought were, pretty amazing even for being in the 60s. You guys were kind of fearless about dealing with some of those shadow issues.
Yes, that was really what we were about, diving into the shadow and exposing it to the light. That was really the kind of basic idea of things. We would take something like vivisection, or animal cruelty or drug addiction, and we would really sort of go right into it and examine it from the inside. It was important work.
It was tremendous, and it goes back to the alchemy work, because it is that to reconcile the opposites, you do have to dive into the shadow, and most people kind of romanticize about doing that, but then when it really comes down to it, they sort of chicken out, and it seemed like you guys really did not chicken out in that area.
No, well, I think, one of the problems with, certainly Christianity in its current form is that it kind of pushes away the darkness and says, no, if we just concentrate on the light, we'll be okay. But, of course, that doesn't happen, and we've seen it, in the Catholic Church with these poor, the priests, and everything like that. You have to acknowledge that aspect of yourself and draw it in and throw light on it and see that it's passionate and understand it and acknowledge it rather than repressing it and pushing it away and projecting it out onto other people and other nations so they become the demons and the devils. It's ridiculous.
It is. And you had mentioned earlier about how, in the group you can deal with those because you project that stuff onto each other in a intimate group, and then you become more consciously aware of it immediately, and just how that I think that came through in your guys' work and in your magazines. Did you feel like in the process you really got an experience of what evil was or what darkness was?
That's a very, very curious question. My take on evil is that the only real evil thing is turning somebody away from their God. That really is the only evil thing. Everything else is really stupidity, blindness, masochism, sadism, bent childhoods, whatever. But that's really the one that really rings the bell. And in a sense, perhaps I did see an aspect of that because, of course, Marianne really directed all the attention, in a sense, onto her. And that was a false god, in a sense. But there's something which I call a useful delusion, that we can delude ourselves about things in order to grow. And then once one's seen through it, you move on to the next. Like a ladder of enlightenment. Each belief system is a rung, and when you've seen through the belief system, you move up to the next rung. But often one has to delude oneself in many ways in order to encompass and live a belief system. Because the only way of getting through a belief system is living it and seeing if it works or doesn't. It doesn't work.
I think that's completely true. That was a remarkable insight into the idea of evil. And it's just everybody, thinks the Process Church is like evil or whatever, but I think most people don't even know what that word means. So for you to have such a tremendous insight into that is totally fantastic. To go back to the magazines a little bit, I wanted to just mention that, your magazines got hugely popular and did, in fact, form a kind of cultural reference for a lot of people. There was a lot of bands and musicians that were really into them. Marianne Faithfull and Funkadelic got very into your magazines. I think they even republished one of them in their record jackets for the album magazine. Yes. Yeah. Did you ever get to meet the members of Funkadelic personally?
Very briefly, the group, but I got to know George Clinton a little bit and spent an afternoon with him, and was just amazed by what a very, very intelligent man he is. Wow. Wonderful. And to see him on stage and to realize, there's a brilliant intelligence in there. It's really quite an eye-opener.
Yeah. I was going to play a little song from Funkadelic. I don't know if Ryan has it ready. I wanted to play Back in Our Minds. Do you have that at all, Ryan? No, maybe not. Maybe he's not listening. Well, maybe if Ryan hears
Maja.
that. Oh, hi.
No, I don't have. Ryan's actually not here.
Oh, he's not. Oh, yeah. I thought that he was the one that I emailed it to. All right, well, we'll just skip the song then. Okay. But if you guys want to, Back in Our Minds is a song from the Maggot Brain album from Funkadelic. It's pretty good.
Sorry, we didn't get it.
Oh, so that's okay.
It was in his email.
You said it was United States Holocaust Museum?
Well, that's okay. Anyway, we'll just move right along then. I wanted to mention to all the listeners that are listening to Progressive Radio Network, this is Expanding Mind. I'm Maja D'Aoust filling in for Erik Davis, my regular host. And I want to let you guys know that if you have questions, you can call in. The number is 888-873-4643. If you have any questions for Timothy, about his book, Love, Sex, Fear, and Death, and his experience in the Process Church. I'd like also, Timothy, if you wouldn't mind, there was another really interesting experience that you had in Mexico about an ecstatic experience that you experienced through flagellation, and that later became a little affiliated with the Process Church because you guys did a public flagellation in London, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, it was actually after that event that you had outlined earlier when I was thrown out of the garden and spent my 3 days in the wilderness, and then was invited back, rather reluctantly, I think, and Marianne kind of had her sort of angry face on, and, I just felt something odd in the air. And I don't know where this came from, Maja. I'm kind of a bit almost ashamed to admit it because I'm not a masochist or a sadist. But it came to my mind that I should flagellate myself. I should get a piece of rope, which I found, make some knots in it, and I went down to a little building we call the temple. And I really beat the hell out of myself. Now, what was so fascinating was that, and I think I picked this up when I used to play soccer, and then the harder you go into a tackle in soccer, the less likely you are to get hurt. So I decided from the beginning I would do it with every bit of energy I could. None of this sort of tap, tap, tap that you see the guys, walking down the street with in Spain, but really whacking. And I felt that the second or third time, I was out of my body, and I was up, absolute ecstasy, up among the clouds, off, and I could see my body whacking myself away down below. Wow. And I guess that the old endorphins, came to it. So, it became a little addictive for the people around there.
Yeah, you kind of made everyone else get into it, too. Is that right?
I didn't make anybody, but I think I came back with such an ecstatic look on my face that people got the point.
You're like, I want some of that.
Yeah, right. Then they would borrow my piece of rope, And then so many people started doing it, they had to make their own piece of the rope.
Well, that's another thing I love about your book is there's so many little kind of tantric, stereotypical mystic experiences that you all had through the process, and that certainly is one of them. Like to go into ecstasy through pain. I mean, that's an age-old method. I mean, the Jains have been doing it forever. It's a very tantric experience that you just kind of figured out to have. You said you're embarrassed that you felt like doing it, but in fact, that's really kind of a staple of going into ecstasy through tantricism and shamanism, and maybe you read a little bit about that later. Did you ever explore any more about that?
Oh, yes, certainly. I've explored it in relationship to brain chemistry, and you see, we were really innocents. We didn't know about Tantra in 1968 or 1967, and a number of the experiences that I can only speak personally, I've now been able to look back in retrospect and understand them as a kind of progression of initiations. But I didn't understand that at the time.
Absolutely. When I was reading your book, I read so many of your descriptions of things, and I'm like, well, that's totally shamanic initiation experiences that you guys were just kind of having. Like you said, you didn't seem aware of it, but they just really found you.
Well, one of the reasons that I chose to write the book with as much honesty as I could was basically to kind of couple up with people in other paths who've had similar experiences, but in their own ways, and to make it obvious that groups like ours were, in a sense, to use Philip Slater's phrase, like prophets extruded from society into a new land in order to find out what's going on there, and then they're pulled back into society, and then anything of value is kind of taken out of that, and society grows from it. And this is the way I've come to see cults as social experiments that, if they were happening within the large consensus, would probably cripple the overall consensus, but can happen in these smaller groups experimentally, and then they come back into the whole, the consensus, and they feed back, oh, look, we really do need to take responsibility, or whatever it is they discover or they've perfected.
It's really interesting. It is. It's like feedback loops. Like you mentioned,
yes.
We kind of retract into these little groups, and then what we learn, we kind of bring back. It's almost like the 100th monkey a little bit, you know?
Well, I think it is. My overall perception of what's happening on the planet at the moment is that we are moving towards some form of singularity. Nobody knows quite what it is or how it's going to happen. But I think that many of the groups, and I include the process in this, were really specifically designed on a sort of superconscious level as a way of accelerating the evolution of the consciousness of groups of people around the planet. Because, a lot's going to be going down over the next few years. We're going to have to learn how not to be afraid in the face of things which are going to look terrifying.
And
really...
Yeah, it brings up another interesting aspect of the process church, which you talked about, in that you guys were sort of apocalyptic, in that you felt this kind of urgency to, quicken the conscious change in people to prepare, because, at that time there was, of course, the huge threat of nuclear proliferation. Do you feel like that really pushed you guys into working harder, that kind of fear of the apocalypse? What kind of role did that play?
We weren't afraid of the apocalypse. We were actually, in a rather perverse way, looking forward to it, because we could see what an awful state humanity had got itself into. And this is England, London in the mid-'60s. We'd just come out of a war. I was born into a war, and most of my colleagues were too. We knew what bombs felt like when they were dropping on houses around us. So the idea that there was some, these two powers had these enormous numbers of nuclear weapons, it was inevitable as far as we were concerned that these things were going to be dropped on us. So, yes, I think that did accelerate the intensity of what we were looking at. But again, I feel that falls, in a sense, under the useful delusion aspect of things, in that it didn't happen as we had hoped or predicted it would. And hasn't happened yet, but it really helped, push us along and keep us together and keep the thing moving. So, yeah, it was helpful.
Do you feel like we still have that pressure now, today, or do you feel like people are progressing, or do you feel like it's going to have another big culmination? Just I know there's no way to know that, obviously, but in your personal opinion.
In my personal opinion, I feel the chips are pretty much where they lie at the moment. There's not much that can be done. I think it's out of our hands in a very specific way. So many things are due to happen at the same time. On the negative side, the pollution and all that sort of stuff is coming to a crescendo. And then on the other hand, there's the whole business of the Galactic Federation, or our place in the universe, our place in the multiverse, from which we've been excluded for a very, very long time. We've been quarantined. And this quarantine has broken down. It is stopping. And there is going to be something happening over the next few years.
Of course, everyone is very excited about 2012, and I just thought it was interesting because the process was had that apocalyptic, focus, and that it's almost like, people need that kind of focus or, doom to inspire them to make changes. Most people don't change their life if everything's going fine, right? Even like on a microcosm level, people need to kind of sometimes have this terrible crisis to inspire that to happen. Do you think that it's going to be a crisis that's going to change consciousness, or do you think that we can actually, alter our consciousness without that crisis?
When I talk to the angels who I work with, they tell me that, yes, there is going to be a massive transformation, but they tell me it's going to be gentler than I could imagine. Now, my imagination is pretty extensive, and, I can certainly imagine massive earth changes. I can imagine pole shifts, which entirely changed the planetary ecosphere. But if it's going to be gentler, yes, I think there is going to be a shift of consciousness. We are due for a shift from third to fourth level of density. And how it's going to happen, I have no idea. And I don't really want to speculate, because whatever I speculate, whatever's going to happen is going to be far more funny and far more intelligent than anything I can come up with.
Well, and that kind of relates back. Can you maybe talk a little bit more, in the 60s when the process was, really getting going, did you find, like at the time where you were, either in London or, when you later came to the States, did you find a lot of kind of companionship when the process would reach out? Like, what was the atmosphere like from your point of view as a member of the Process Church coming out?
You mean when I left the process, or back
when you were
60s?
like doing outreach from the process, like even just going out into the community?
Well, in London, before we came to America, in London it was very difficult. Firstly, because we were English and prophets are almost always not given much joy in their own lands, and Robert was very heartily jeered at Oxford University and the London School of Economics. And that was, among a number of things, I think, one of the aspects that forced us out of England. And when we came to America, we found a much more affable, a much more interested population. And I think that was when the first sort of major expansion happened.
And you literally spread all over. I mean, you guys had offices in New York and Chicago, and, do you think that it was just a good atmosphere in the country right now for that to happen, that people were ready for those kind of ideas?
Back then?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Of course. I mean, everybody was looking. I mean, it was the height of the hippie era. Everybody was searching. The other religions, Hare Krishna and everything, Scientology was starting to make its inroads. The Moonies were starting a little later. Yeah, no, everybody was looking. But one of the things about us is we made it very, very difficult to get in. We made it very demanding. People had to give everything away. They had to work, 24 hours a day for us or whatever. So we never really expanded to the extent that we could have had we made it all more lenient and acceptable.
Right. And it was interesting because there's a part in your book which I thought applied to many different things. You mentioned everyone was kind of searching at that time. And what you said kind of really drew you in, that Marianne really drew you in, and with the Process Church, was that she made you feel special. And it was like an atmosphere where you're searching for things and your kind of thirst to expand your consciousness could have an arena. And I think in a lot of communes and cults and groups, they do have that way of making people feel special. And at times when everyone's speaking, it's like if they can just get in with some place like that, it's very kind of I think that's why people get involved in groups like that. Is that pretty much? Do you feel like that was a big lure for you, that kind of special destiny idea?
It's a very tricky area, Maja, because in a sense, I mean, again, speaking personally, I had an actual problem with feeling special because I had a survivor guilt thing happening when the doodlebugs were coming down on other houses and not mine. So at 2 years old and 3 years old, my little childish ego, thought, gosh, I must be special, So I feel that Marianne played on that sense of specialness, which I've now come to see as being, completely delusionary. Now, in terms of cults in general, or groups in general, they almost all function on the basis of we're right and they're wrong, And that creates a kind of a specialness. We are special. And I think I make a little jibe of the poor Jehovah's Witnesses, when I say something along the lines, they're even more happy when somebody rejects them than when they
Well, yeah, and
it just
you
proves
mentioned
how
you
right
guys...
we are and how wrong they are,
Yeah.
So that's a very dangerous and paradoxical area. And yes, we called ourselves the elect, as if we were elected by God for this special mission. And, perhaps to some degree, some of us bought into it. Maybe some people bought into it completely. I certainly never did. I was going more for the sort of personal experience.
Yeah, you really were able to stay out of that kind of elitist attitude. But I think you're right, in a lot of cults, it really colors it. Did you experience a lot of people that really got into that elitist aspect in the process?
it's like fundamentalism. It's a phase one has to go through in order to know what it's like to treat people, in a sense, badly, and to know what it feels like afterwards. So I think that the elitism is something that people go through. Whether the foundation ever got through it, I don't think so. I think to the end, we probably thought ourselves special. Perhaps now, they're best friends out in Utah. Perhaps they don't have that anymore, but we certainly did.
And it's true. It does go up on the top levels. I mean, you said that's, a kind of thing that cults have, but certainly the major religions have that too, that they believe that they're right and someone else is wrong. And like you said, like that extends into the major religions, not just Jehovah's Witnesses, but
yes.
Certainly Christianity, Islam. I mean, they all kind of do that, really, to some extent. So that's why, again, I think it's so interesting that you can see what happens inside the process as this microcosm of how we relate to each other in spiritual communities. Did you ever feel like a kind of zoom out while you were in the process and had that kind of vision about that it was like this little microcosm that could apply on a larger level?
I think probably the microcosmic aspect came clearer after I left. I think we were all too much involved in the day-to-day thing to really get that kind of perspective. But what we did have, we had these what were called enactments. And generally fairly early on, and really through the Stuhl period and after that, whereby groups of us would kind of almost naturally fall into patterns of behavior which would be very, very similar to patterns of behavior of historical incidents down through history, down through human history. And we would fall into these different roles. And in a sense, we thought of it as a way of unknotting history. And certainly we felt we were creating some kind of effect on the consensus. I don't think we would ever try to define exactly what it was. But I've subsequently come to understand that the world's mind itself has to be released of a lot of the knots and repressions that have been baked into the planetary circuitry over the last, couple of 100,000 years. So that has to be released, and I think that's what we were doing, but that only came out in retrospect. At that point, when we were actually doing it, we felt we were kind of unknotting these historical fiascos. I remember one, Henry VIII, I remember one around that period.
Yeah, I mean, the description you gave of those in the book was amazing. And it's like by going through the reenactments, you guys are like trying to almost work through that in the present time of all these, historical events and doing it through you as people. And there's actually been a lot of psychological developments of different techniques where people do that, not to the extent that you guys did in the process with these actual historical events, but they do it like within, little family events that would have happened, and they reenact those.
Yes, absolutely.
And then you guys took it to this mega level where you just take on, events that, influenced human history. Whose idea was it to start those?
Well, there again, you see, one of Marianne's brilliances is you could never really pin anything on her because she would work through people. She would throw an idea out, and then the person who said the thing that would agree with her, she would say, yes, okay, let's do that. But I think it was probably has to be down to her because she was so psychic. And, it wasn't something we would consciously set up. It was something that would occur quite naturally in the course of our everyday working lives, and we would find these particular interactions would happen. And then part of Marianne's brilliance was to decode and deconstruct that and see what everybody sort of received out of it and gave to it, and all the deceptions and all the expressions, that were relevant. It was a fascinating process, and one has to admire her for that.
Yeah, I mean, for all her misgivings and control, she really did it seemed like she inspired a lot of change and work in you all, even if it was through, some of these more negative aspects. But even then, you guys kind of dove into the shadow stuff through her. Do you feel like most people in the church had a good experience with her in that way, like through learning, or was there a lot of animosity towards her?
There was a group, the inner circle, basically, who were the only people who really had anything to do with her. A lot of people, the Sister Lysandra, who was one of the contributors to the book, spent 20 years in the church and never met the woman, never met
right.
her. So she was very, very, very secretive and would only keep the people around her, who were who she knew really well. So beneath that, in the hierarchy, there was an enormous amount of mystery about her, and the people who were in the top of the hierarchy, if you like, would always damp down any questions about her, or, oh, no, we don't talk about that kind of thing. So, no, there really wasn't that much animosity. There was momentary animosity because I think, love and hate are very closely combined, and certainly, there's a tremendous amount of love directed towards her. And I know personally when I left, it took me at least, 10 years perhaps to really root out all the various different angers and hatred that I'd had, that I developed.
Wow. Yeah, it was interesting to me, the hierarchy you mentioned, how that formed in your group. Again, another microcosm of how things tend to work in communities of people. You guys had an extensive hierarchy that was pretty well developed, I thought, at the different levels. And like you said, there was the inner circle and then the lower levels. And I just was curious, did you find that people were resentful of the hierarchy, or was everyone just kind of cool with it and did their thing?
I think pretty much everybody did their thing. I'm sure there were some resentments, when somebody got, raised up above somebody else. But the levels, the gaps between the levels were pretty profound. It took quite a long time to move from one level to another, and there was no guarantee that you would actually move from one level to another if you weren't accepted. And there were also quite a lot of secrets held between the levels. So, we had sacred names, for instance, which were, we couldn't reveal to any of the other levels, and a lot of that sort of material. And those who were intimate with Marianne in Marianne's circle, none of us could ever talk about what went on in those endless meetings.
Because did she expressly forbid you to talk about them, or was it just kind of understood?
I think it was acknowledged. I think probably, we all bought into that particular system, that hierarchical system.
We're coming up. Oh, I'm sorry. We're coming up towards the end of the hour. That went by so fast. I wanted to give you a chance to tell people your website information. Do you want to give people the address?
Yes, the address is timothywyllie.com.
Oh, that's very easy. I also wanted to mention...
Go
ahead.
No, just to mention, we are doing the Process show on Sunday.
That's exactly what I was going to mention.
Why don't you mention it? Because I don't have the details in front of me.
It's going to be this Sunday at the Silent Movie Theater in Los Angeles. If any of you guys are around and want to check out Timothy in that, it's going to be pretty fun. Jody and Adam from Feral House are going to be putting it on, and I'll be there too. And Timothy, I believe you're going to be speaking on your book and answering questions. Is that right?
I absolutely, and I put together a little slideshow. William Morrison from Skinny Puppy has put together a trailer of material. There's a wonderful band that has taken some of the Process music and kind of amped it up, so that's going to be great fun. And we're going to do a little sort of 10 or 15-minute Process celebration just to kind of get people in the mood. It's going to be great fun.
Oh, that's great. That's going to be at 6 o'clock Sunday, August 23rd, for any of you who want to join. Timothy, thank you so much for being on the show. It was absolutely fantastic talking to you, and I just really appreciate you, sharing your experience. I think it's really going to help a lot of people who might have experienced the same thing.
Well, thank you, and a pleasure to talk to you and have such an intelligent conversation and such good questions, Maja. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Timothy.
And I look forward to meeting you on Sunday.
I know, me too. Talk to you guys next week when Erik will be back with us. Thanks for listening.